tweeting during this presentation. If you'd like to join in, please use hashtag #ITSM Academy. You can see them in the chat window on the right for you. I've launched the first polling question to give, we're going to try to give Pam a sense of our audience today, so if you could answer your role or position for us, that would be great. During the presentation, the information that Pam presents may raise some questions, or you may be looking for some additional clarification or information. We've scheduled Pam's time at the end of today's session to answer your questions. To submit your questions, please use the chat window that appears on the GoToMeeting box, which is located in the upper right corner of your screen. Open your chat window by clicking on the plus sign next to the word chat, and just type your question in the chat log section and click the send button. And please feel free to submit your questions at any time at all during today's presentation. Okay, let me see. We've got 81% have voted, so if you could make your selection on this poll, we'll be closing that and giving some feedback to Pam on that. And perfect. Closing that poll. Okay, Pam, so we've got the majority, 36%, are process owners or manager. We've got 23% that are IT managers, 16% consultants, followed by 14 other and 11 project managers. So let's see what the other is. Business analyst, ITSM architect, auditor, the IT auditor.
Okay.
And process engineer and director of IS and audit and compliance.
So we've got a great mix.
We have a great mix today. Yes, we do. Okay. And excuse me 1 minute. We've got a large number of attendees for this session, and Pam has a lot to cover. We'll answer as many questions as possible today, and if we're unable to respond to each of you today, don't worry, because we'll compile all of your questions and answers in a Q&A report, and we'll send you a link by email to download that report in just a few days. Now, I have another polling question for you, Pam, and I am Lisa. Could you help me with that second polling question, please?
There you go, Karen. It's up.
Thank you. And this one has a bit longer answers for it, so let me just complete them for you. How mature is ITSM at your organization? So is it initial, that you recognize issues exist and that they need to be addressed? Is it repeatable? The processes and the procedures exist, but you often rely on individual knowledge. Are they defined, that you have documented processes formalized by training with some service level management? Is it managed? Processes are good practice with supporting metrics. The business and IT are aligned. Or is it optimized? Processes are best practices with the CSI strategy. IT is involved in the business strategy. Please make your selection. Wow, they're voting quickly on this one, Pam. We've got 80% voted already.
Wow.
I think this is a morning group also.
Apparently.
I think it is. Okay. I'll give you just a couple more seconds, and we will be closing this poll. Okay. Okay, Pam. And we have 37% defined.
Wow.
Followed by 27% repeatable.
Mm-hmm.
And 22% initial. 10% is managed. And 5% is optimized.
Okay, so we have a lot of people kind of in the early stages and right in the middle in terms of maturity. That's great. Good mix.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Now, Pam, could you bring up the Academy slide for me?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of ITSM education. We have trained tens of thousands of students on-site across the Americas and in our public training centers in Fort Lauderdale, Dallas, Minneapolis, Phoenix, Reston, Salt Lake City, and Tampa, as well as in our virtual classroom. Now let's introduce today's speaker. Pam has over 15 years of leadership experience in IT and service transformation with responsibility for providing best practices, thought leadership, and guidance related to the ITIL framework. She has led a number of IT transformation initiatives with measurable results in customer satisfaction, efficiency, and effectiveness. In addition to operational responsibility, Pam has consulted for Fortune 50 companies on IT strategy, IT service management, and organizational change initiatives. She's an ITIL expert, an ITIL service manager. She is Six Sigma certified and a certified help desk director. Good morning, Pam.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We're very excited about your presentation today.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this. So let me say to all of the attendees, welcome to ITSM Adoption, the Ingredients of Success for Organizational Change. And as Karen said, we have a lot to cover this morning. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. And let's get started by looking at the pace of change. And if you look at the data on this slide, it's clear that the rate of change in most industries has been speeding up for a long time. And if you look at some of these charts, you've got years across the bottom and activity on the left-hand side, and stakes are higher than ever with so much change going on, right? We need to be able to maneuver quickly and smartly. And looking at this chart, you can see that the increase in change is exponential, right? So it's not linear. And if you think about it, all of the change that is noted on this chart will involve technology and the management of that technology. So technology is involved in everything we do. And ITSM, or service management, underpins the ability of businesses to change effectively. And IT service management requires people. And our IT staff are dealing with so much change right now, not only in business, in technology itself, and within, our provider organizations. There's a lot going on. Now here's a number that's a bit staggering. Roughly 70% of IT projects fail to recognize the intended benefit. 70%. That is just a staggering number. And the root cause is often traced back to issues relating to people adapting to change, whether that's in IT or whether that's in the business. So think about it for a minute. If you were to look at a list of all of your IT projects, everything going on in your organization that involves IT, there's a good chance that 70% of them will never have the intended return on investment. That's really sobering. But many organizations just don't consider how to help people adapt to the changes that are occurring. They're very, very focused on, let's roll out the new process, let's roll out the new technology, let's enable the business to do their objectives, but they don't necessarily think about the people. Now there is some good news, right? With all of this change, there are windows of opportunity that are opening up very frequently. And if we can master helping people adapt to change, we can jump through those windows before they close. So some questions that we should ask ourselves, right? What external changes are we seeing that impact our organization? What's the new technology? How are we supporting the business, and what's changing in that business environment? And what happens if we're not able to move fast enough to seize the opportunity or dodge a risk or a hazard, right? What happens to the business, but what happens to the IT service provider? And now let's turn that around. I mean, what could we really accomplish if we were able to successfully tackle change? It would be amazing, right? And that's what we're here to talk about today. How can we help people adapt to the changes that are occurring? So let's start by understanding why people resist change. And it really comes down to 3 areas: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So if we look at fear, what are some of the things affecting people around fear? Well, there's a fear of failing, a fear of no longer being an expert in the technology or the process or how work gets done in general in my organization. There's uncertainty. Am I really up to the job? Do I have the right skills? Uncertainty about the outcome. And then doubt. Why are we really taking on this initiative? If I make this change, what's going to happen to me? If I document my knowledge like I'm being asked to by my manager, am I going to lose my job? Is my position going to be outsourced? Right? So fear, uncertainty, and doubt are really behind a lot of change resistance. And most of the time, people don't recognize that they're even exhibiting change resistance. If you were to point it out to them, they would justify their behavior. They wouldn't even recognize what they're doing. Now, that's not to say that on occasion you don't run into a person who purposefully resists change, but it isn't something that occurs frequently. So as I said, people don't realize that they're change resistant, but there are some symptoms that you will notice. So something like false urgency. Now, false urgency is actually really dangerous because it can undermine your project and the confidence of your entire project team. False urgency occurs when people feel anger or anxiety about the need to change, and it manifests itself in this frantic activity, right? People are running from meeting to meeting. You're looking at endless PowerPoint presentations. There's agendas and long task lists, and people are willing to thoughtlessly abandon the status quo. But little is actually accomplished, and what is done is usually not well thought out. So false urgency can be more dangerous than something like complacency because it looks like true urgency, but it's very distracting and it's draining energy in your organization. Missed deadlines could occur with or without warning. You may not know that critical tasks aren't going to be done on time until the date passes. Meetings that get scheduled where people don't show up or critical resources don't show up. The only person in the room ends up being a project manager or process owner. Teams arguing over progress, right, or a solution or next steps, but nothing ever gets settled. You could be arguing over the incident management process or roles and responsibilities, but differences never are resolved. And then complacency, right? If I do nothing but act as though everything is fine, that's complacency. And if I'm doing nothing and acting as though everything is fine, you can't make progress. Therefore, that change isn't going to happen, right? So in my mind, as the person who's just sitting there doing nothing, the change isn't going to happen. Status quo is going to stay in place. And I'm not threatened. I don't feel that fear, urgency, and doubt. So I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge Cotter's 8-step model, right? The ITSM materials provide some guidance on the Cotter model. It's a great comprehensive model, and the ITSM materials just don't do it justice, right? I work with this model. It's a great model to build into a project, but it isn't a company project or culture. So also when people look at this model, they don't know where to start or how to apply it, right? Model requires cohesive leadership that's supportive of your ITSM initiative. Leaders really need to be able to foster an environment of accountability. And in many organizations, the leadership cohesion and accountability just isn't at the level that's necessary to fully execute the Cotter model and be able to recognize the full benefits from it. So a lot of people find this model very challenging. We aren't going to go through this model today, If you wanted to dive deeper into the Cotter Model, the idle materials left you longing for more. John Cotter's published many books on this model. There's a lot of information out there. And as I said, it's a very good model, but I'm going to show you kind of a little simpler way of using a change model later on. Let's take a moment to look at some common organizational challenges. And these are organizational challenges that sometimes get in the way of change. And we need to be aware of these issues when we're planning for change. The first item there is a lack of accountability. So this is where you see an organization that's blaming versus making change happen, right? Something goes wrong, people blame others rather than ask how they could change the outcome. That's a lack of accountability. Second item is leadership cohesion. So we have leaders in the company that work as a team, right? But often you have several leaders that will believe in your ITSM initiative and they'll be behind it. But then there'll be others who will think it slows them down or it's going to have some sort of negative impact. And rather than working through their concerns with their peers, they share those concerns with members of their team. And that directly undermines change adoption. That's a great example of a leader having issues with change but not being accountable for resolving it. But they're also their relationship with their peers, they don't feel like they're comfortable resolving it with their peers and talking it through with their peers. So leadership cohesion. Actions that are not aligned with words. So we've all probably heard the term, actions speak louder than words. And in this area, I encourage you to be aware of what I call the inherent response, the thing that we're naturally going to respond with when someone asks a question, right? So let me give you an example. We say that we want to have quality IT services, right? But we routinely make conscious decisions to release services that have known errors, which make it difficult for the business to work. So when that IT staff comes to us and they explain to us, the application or the service has issues, has known errors, and maybe they're wondering if they should go live, we always say yes, right? We're saying we want a quality service, but we're saying go ahead and put the service into production. It's a reasonable business decision, but you can see how that might confuse our staff. We say we want to cut IT costs. IT is too expensive. But then when the next version of the iPhone comes out, everyone has one. Right? We're sending mixed messages with our actions, and this is a quick way to lose momentum and credibility and even some trust around a change initiative. And finally, we're focusing solely on our project schedule. So while a project schedule is somewhat motivating, it doesn't address most of the emotions that people going through change are feeling. Schedules don't excite people, right? In a lot of cases, it scares people because the date on your schedule is the date that they have to change. It's the date they have to be able to perform. Now, I'm not saying you don't publicize a schedule or even talk about the schedule or communicate the schedule. You have to do that. But I'm saying that communication needs to include so much more so that we can address that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that people are experiencing. So regardless of what is changing, there are some crucial elements relating to change that should be considered for your ITSM initiative. Number one, we need to understand the value proposition of the service management initiative. We need to be able to explain why. Why is this important at the company level, the division department level, and the individual level? So as an individual, what's in it for me? The second item, we need to remember that emotions are driving behaviors. So in an earlier slide, we talked about the symptoms of resistance. If you're seeing symptoms such as that false urgency or missed deadlines or complacency, we need to remember that emotions are behind those symptoms. And we need to get to the root cause and address those emotions if we want to make progress. And with any ITSM initiative, whether it's a simple process change or a full-blown idle adoption, we want to foster an environment that is focused on learning and improvement. right? We want to create a safe environment where people can respectfully question why we're doing it, and where it's okay to even reasonably fail, right? That failure could be used as a learning opportunity. So let me give you an example there. I escalate a medium priority incident, right? It goes to the wrong department. I send it to the wrong department. We missed the service level agreement. This is a simple example, but obviously something went wrong with our process or procedures. So we want to foster an environment where we can get to the root cause of that issue so it can be addressed so it doesn't happen again. And we want to ensure we have feedback channels and metrics so we can find these opportunities. So now that we've talked about why people resist change and some organizational challenges to look out for and some crucial elements, I want to review a really simple, easy to remember model that you can use for your service management initiatives. This model is easily remembered. It works with any size initiative. And while the model won't solve your organizational challenges or the challenges that we talked about earlier, it can help to diminish the impact of some of those challenges so you can make progress in spite of them. And I would encourage you to download the slides. As Karen mentioned earlier, they're available, and the link was provided. Download the slides. Take this slide in particular and post it in your office or your cubicle, because you would be surprised how quickly you can pick this up and incorporate it into your projects, into your initiatives, even into some very simple tasks, and how much of a difference it can make. So this model is called Adcar. It was developed by a gentleman by the name of Proshi in the late 90s. This is an outcome-oriented model, and it can help to transition your organization through change. It can help you avoid change resistance, and it can help you diagnose resistance. So let's walk through each of the phases, and then we'll jump into some more detail here. So first we have awareness, and this is where we're explaining kind of the reasoning and logic behind why we're doing this. Why is this change necessary? We then have desire, and we want people to want to participate. So this is facilitating their decision to actually participate in this change. Right? We want them to consciously or unconsciously get excited and actually want to participate. Knowledge, which is providing knowledge regarding how to actually make the change. The ability, this is where we're supporting them and we're supporting their performance. And then reinforcement is where we're taking action to ensure that changes are sustained. Each stage of this model is sequential, but yet it's cumulative, right? And you'll see that as we walk through the different phases. I've used this model for projects, but I've also used this model for really simple tasks with some surprising results. So something like writing an email about a controversial service management related change, I've been able to use this model. So I had a client actually where there were two leaders that disagreed about everything. I mean, it was almost a matter of principle. And it was really difficult as a consultant to get anything done, but it was even harder on their teams if they were just trying to do their jobs. So this was something I couldn't change about this organization. And so I used this model when I would send emails about decisions, issues, and risks. I would write the email with each of these phases in mind, and both leaders each time would agree on a course of action as a result of that email. I addressed a lot of the emotion that they were feeling. And I couldn't resolve their personal issues, but I could certainly present something in a very logical way that got to the emotion that they were feeling, because let's not forget, leaders feel emotion too. So I had a lot of success with this. I can also tell you that I trained a lot of their managers that reported to them how to use this model, and they still use it today. So let's walk through each of the areas that are part of Adcar. So it starts with awareness, and awareness is all about why the change is necessary. So remember when we talked about the need to understand the value proposition, it's a crucial element of awareness. Now, you'll notice the questions on the right-hand side of the slide, and all of these questions relate to awareness. This list, it's not comprehensive. These are just some examples, right? So why is the company adopting ITIL processes? How is this going to be better? What are we trying to achieve? The why part, or that awareness, is often overlooked when we make changes, yet it's an important piece of the puzzle, and it's the first part of the Adcar model. Understanding that why gives you a really strong foundation for your communication plan, which we're going to talk about later. But if we want to help people through changes, we first need to start by helping them understand why it's important. And once you understand why, you can begin to plan how to help others understand why. And depending on the size of the initiative, how you do that, I mean, it could be meetings, emails, lunch and learn sessions. There's a number of ways you could go about kind of spreading the word and talking about why. But we do need to help everyone understand why the change is important. With desire, right, we want to motivate people to participate. And motivation for people comes in many different forms. So the questions noted here are some examples where the answers may help motivate people to participate. So what happens if we do nothing? Right? That's a very powerful question. And the answer is going to vary, right, from project to project, company to company. But the answer often surprises people. When we tell people why changes are happening, rarely do we ever tell them what happens if we just do nothing. Right? And the answer to this question can be a real motivator. How is this project going to help with teamwork? Will the new processes help to break down some of the silos that exist? Or is it going to shine a light on problems that exist in teams? Again, some questions that where more information can really instill a desire for people to participate. Another technique to build desire in terms of participation is to have the communication coming from someone that is trusted in the service provider organization. So someone who has a good reputation, who has a good following, maybe ask this person to be a change evangelist, right? Sometimes just who is actually communicating can make a huge difference in motivation for people. We also have performance objectives. A lot of people are very motivated by performance objectives, especially if achieving those objectives is tied to their compensation in some way. Knowledge. And knowledge is only effective if we have that awareness and desire first. Right? Change doesn't begin with knowledge. This is where a lot of projects and initiatives go wrong. They think they just need to do some training. Right? Change doesn't actually begin with knowledge. Training isn't the first and only step. We need that awareness and desire first. If you think about it, you've probably been to a training session where people didn't want to be there. And it was disruptive. They surfed the internet, they did email, they took phone calls, they stepped out of the room a lot. What do you think they really retained from that training? Not much. So training is important, but we need that awareness and desire first. And knowledge is also bigger than just training, right? What documentation is needed? Does the business need to be aware of your ITSM initiative? Does it change their process? If the business is used to calling a subject matter expert in IT about an application problem, and now you're telling them to call the service desk, they not only need to be aware of the change, but you probably have some change management to do with them as well. Another example of knowledge would be a coach or a mentor or subject matter expert and assigning them to individuals or teams. In the example I just brought up about the business contacting the service desk rather than the application subject matter expert, perhaps that application subject matter expert becomes a mentor for certain members of the service desk. So there's a lot of power in assigning a coach or mentor to those that are affected by the change. The ability component of Adcar, it supports performance. So this is where it's about being able to implement the required skills and behaviors. So what fosters ability, right? It's access to the right tools, access to the right resources. It's feedback on what's being done, whether it's right or wrong. You know, if I make a misstep, tell me about it. That actually fosters ability and performance. Sometimes performance and ability just takes some time and practice. But we need to provide people with the tools and resources to be successful. They need to feel supported. They need to feel like they're set up for success. When you get to ability, this is where people are usually the most nervous. This is where they actually have to perform. So we need to let them know they're being supported. We need to give them escalation paths so they know where to go. They need to know where to find their processes and procedures. Another technique around ability is just to check in with people, to make sure that things are going well, to make sure that you're there if questions, you know, they have questions, to maybe you could sit in the area so that you're easily accessible. Managers are also usually heavily engaged with ability and performance. So we need to make sure that they have also bought into the changes and they can help members of their team. Finally, we get to the reinforcement component of Adcar. And without reinforcement, you'd be surprised how often people just revert back to the way they used to do it, right? The old behaviors. They start using the old processes and they tell you that it was the only way they could get their work done. So we need to reinforce the changes in the environment. And we should plan for this early, right? There's some examples of areas that you should consider. You know, they're noted. Some additional reinforcement ideas would be, again, giving that feedback to employees, but saying thank you. And thank you for doing a good job. Visible recognition by our senior leaders. Right? So if you have an all-hands meeting, having your senior leader, your CIOs, just acknowledge the work that's been done and talk about the project. Project-sponsored celebrations for employees, another great example. A lot of projects do this right after implementation. And then compensation and appraisal systems that are supportive of the change. And I want to stress that. They should be supportive of positive change, right? One of the risks with reinforcement is that we sometimes reward the wrong behaviors, right? So we need to be sure that our incentive programs encourage the right behaviors. I worked with an organization where they wanted second-level engineers to be more responsive to incidents and requests. So what did they do? They added a checkbox into their ITSM tool, and it was the box that said acknowledge. So the second-level engineers could go in when they had an incident or request, and they would acknowledge it. The thought was that if they acknowledged it, they'd be aware of it, they would work on it in accordance with service level agreements or operating level agreements. Well, that didn't happen, right? They were actually compensated. They had objectives around acknowledging those incidents and requests. And they had those objectives in their performance review. It tied to their compensation. But the behavior that it reinforced was clicking that box. They would check that acknowledge box. They didn't work on the actual ticket. Right? So a better option there would have been to base those incentives and those objectives on SLA or OLA compliance. Okay, so we do need to make sure that those incentive programs are encouraging the right behaviors. And we should also make sure that any rewards are really meaningful. Make sure that they're based on something tangible, achieving objectives or positive momentum in the metrics, because if the rewards aren't meaningful and tied to the change, you will lose some credibility. So be sure that any kind of incentives or rewards are aligned with the outcome you're trying to achieve. Okay, so we've reviewed the Adcar model, which is that simplified, outcome-oriented change model that you can use to improve adoption in your organization. And I really do encourage you to post the slide which showed all 5 of those Adcar components in your office somewhere, because you will pick it up very, very quickly. But even if you don't use an organizational change model at all, right, there are 4 areas, and if you focus on them, you will increase ITSM adoption. It may not be perfect, right, but you're going to increase your opportunity for success. And the first area is planning. So we want to plan for staff adoption of your change. Develop an organizational change plan where you define what's the desired end state and define tasks to get you there. That plan could stand completely on its own, or you could build tasks into your project plan. Either one. Now, I do encourage you to use a change model to guide you in defining your tasks that are associated with getting to that end state that you're trying to get to. And the Adcar model or other change models can help you think about change differently and to focus on communications and activities that really help people adapt. So I encourage it, but again, if you don't use it, if you focus on these 4 areas, you're going to improve adoption, you're going to improve your opportunity for success. Now, you know, I said develop an organizational change plan, and people sometimes get confused when I say that. Right? What is an organizational change plan? Let me give you an example. This is a change plan, an organizational change plan from my book, actually, that I've written on this. And in this example, right, we have the objective on the left-hand side, your desired state, what's the gap between the current state and the desired state, what activities or tasks do I need to undertake to close that gap to get to the desired state, and then what are my success measures. And I'm going to walk through one of these examples just because I know this might be a little bit of an eye chart, right, when you're looking at it online. So let's go ahead and walk through the first one. So our objective here is to increase IT staff engagement in determining process improvement activities, or opportunities, right? So what does that really look like? What's the desired state here? We want our staff to suggest ways to be more effective in supporting the business. We want them to come up with ideas, right? But we also want them to feel like their input and those ideas are valued by the management team. And we want those team members, you know, they should be tasked with implementing the suggested improvements. They should own it. So in this organization, what's the gap from the current state? Well, our IT staff rarely make suggestions for improvement, and the leaders, they probably don't acknowledge suggestions appropriately, if they, you know, acknowledge them at all. So how do we fix that? How do we get to the desired state? In this example, we're going to develop incentives, encourage suggestions. We're going to create a process so they submit those suggestions, and in this case, it's go to someone else other than our leader, right? Because we're going to form a review council that includes cross-functional leadership and staff to review those suggestions. Those are our activities and tasks. And then how do we know that we're successful? Right? What's our success measure? We're going to increase the number of suggestions. We're going to see improved employee engagement scores. And then, you know, the percentage of suggestions implemented. So this is an example of an organizational change plan. Probably not something you've seen before or done before, but if you really want to help people adapt to change and you really want to have a lot of success with change, you need to plan for the behaviors that you want to see. Okay. Let's take a quick look at the second objective on this change plan. We want to reinforce accountability for improving incident management service level compliance, so those response and resolution times. The desired state is our staff work cross-functionally to resolve incidents. Teamwork is heightened, and some of those silos are torn down or minimized. And then we have a strong focus on metrics to drive improvement and understand challenge areas. What's the gap from current state? Our IT silos impact our ability to meet service levels. staff at all levels aren't held accountable for SLA compliance, right? So that's our gap. So how do we fix that so we can get to the desired state? What are our activities? We're going to create some baseline metrics for the existing process. We're going to develop objectives for management and staff. We're going to conduct focus groups. So we're going to gather input regarding necessary process and system enhancements. And then we're going to communicate expectations and provide training and documentation. So what are our success measures? Compliance against service levels, progress against objectives, and employee satisfaction scores. So that's our second example from an organizational change plan. So the second focus area for success is engagement. Engagement means focusing or engaging members of your team, and in some cases engaging members of the business in the resolution and in the change, or in the solution and in the change. And I would encourage you to engage those closest to the work. People actually doing the work, they know what's working. They know where the challenges are with your processes or your technology. Engage them in finding the right solution. They can help redefine a process. Engaging them encourages them to own it, and it reduces their fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Now, we need to engage leaders as well. Remember, they're critical to success, and they have their own fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But I would engage those closest to the work in defining the solution. And you'd be surprised. If you give the team some guidance and guidelines, you'll be surprised at what they actually can accomplish. There's a number of techniques you can use to gather input, right, from your organization. Some of them are noted in that second main bullet. But asking for input and engaging members of your team in the solution actually improves buy-in. So engagement would be the second focus area. Our third area of focus is communication, and this is one of your strongest tools, communication. Do it early, do it well, do it often. Right? Be as transparent in your communications as possible. And have a communication plan. So I look at communication plans as having two parts. Okay, often the first part is overlooked. And part one involves defining stakeholders and their information needs. And we should do that first. And communication needs may differ depending on your stakeholder or your audience. If you're communicating with leaders about why your organization is adopting ITIL, you're probably going to be more strategic with your communications. But if you're communicating with IT staff that work with customers, you probably want to talk about the benefits to the customer. Right? The needs of those two audiences, it's different. But you're still building awareness by explaining the why. Right? Why is the organization adopting ITIL in that example? The second part of the communication plan involves defining key messages for each of those stakeholder groups and determining the method of communication. So whether it's going to be email or a newsletter or meeting, what's the method? And then what's the schedule? And that Adcar model that we went through can really help you determine content of those messages. And if you look at your project schedule and you look at the content, you can determine the schedule for delivering those messages. So I'd also say about a communication plan, it can stand on its own, or you can add tasks into your project plan. I encourage you, don't make things too complicated. I do think you need to plan for organizational change, and you need to plan, have a communication plan. But if you have a broader project plan, build the tasks into your project plan. Right? There's no need to have 3 separate schedules going on. You can build it into one project plan. But an organizational change plan and a communication plan can stand on their own as well. So if you don't have a project plan, it's a small initiative, they can stand on their own. But communication is a very, very powerful of your initiative. The fourth area is metrics. Metrics, again, very powerful motivator when you're making changes. It's important to understand your baseline metrics going into your changes, right? And not only, for the IT organization, but also at the team and individual level, right? So when you think about metrics, what's your SLA compliance as an example, or your incident resolution time by severity, right? Whatever it is that's changing in your organization, take a baseline regarding existing performance. Review those baseline numbers and gain buy-in for them. Right? Quite often I hear from people that the data in their ITSM tools or the data that they've gathered from their tools, it doesn't mean anything. It's not, people don't use the system the way they're supposed to use it, so it doesn't mean anything. But you would be surprised how often I can take that data, put it into Excel, use some standard best practices around normalizing data, and you can glean some great information from that data. So, but you need to publicize your findings there and gain buy-in for those baselines. But also publicize what you would like to see change about the baseline. So as an example, if you have 60% compliance to SLAs and you want to get to 90 or 100%, publicize the baseline and the goal. Right? That will help to motivate people. Throughout your entire initiative and beyond, right, for some period of time afterwards, make sure that you're routinely reviewing all of your metrics with any of the interested parties, stakeholders, people doing the work. Even if numbers aren't going in the right direction, review them anyway. Be transparent. Ask for feedback. Right? What changes do we need to make for success? We're going right back to engagement, right? Ask for feedback. If the numbers are going in the right direction, publicize it. Let people know their work's appreciated. Ask people how to make it even better, and then reward them for those suggestions. So after those initial changes are made, make sure you establish those metrics in the organization so that the change is supported. Ensure that leadership's reviewing those numbers. And if you do some sort of monthly performance report, make sure that those numbers are incorporated into that report so that there's monitoring happening. So 4 focus areas for success, right? We have planning, which is developing our change plan, defining that desired end state, and what are the tasks and activities to get there. We had engagement, which is engaging people who do the work in determining the solutions and ensuring their managers are ready to support them. We had communications, so developing that communication plan, defining our stakeholders in the audience, what are the key messages, content, and schedule for those communications. And then we had metrics, so understanding the baseline metrics at your division, team, and individual level, being very transparent about progress or lack thereof, and engaging once again to ask for feedback. So we've talked about a lot today. We reviewed why people resist change, what are some symptoms of that resistance. We talked about some organizational challenges to watch out for, as well as some crucial elements of change. And then we also reviewed the very simple Adcar model that you can use to avoid change resistance, overcome change resistance, and plan for it. And finally, we also talked about the 4 areas of success. So in summary, I would say that service management success requires more than just processes and tools, right? It requires people. People have emotions, and all of those people need to get behind the change, and they need to work towards a common goal. And so I'm going to quote John Cotter for a minute, right? John Cotter says, change requires you to appeal to the hearts and minds of those involved. Right? We can't just use statistics. We can't just use schedules. We have to get to the heart. We have to get to those emotions. We have to focus on the emotions that are behind the behavior so we gain buy-in and we facilitate adoption. So strong planning, staff engagement, communications, and metrics are all keys to success. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to the session. I mean, I hope that what we've discussed today can help you in your current and future IT service management initiatives. This webinar was being recorded, so I know it's going to be on the ITSM Academy website. But if you would like for me to rerun the webinar or you've got follow-up questions, you certainly have my contact information and feel free to get in touch with me. So I'm going to ask ITSM Academy, do we have any questions at this point?
Hello, Pam, and first of all, thank you. That was outstanding. So thank you. Lots of pearls of wisdom for us in this presentation.
Thank you.
And yes, we do have questions for you. So
okay.
We'll let you take a breath for a moment, and then we'll get you on that. I'd like to, while we're grouping the Q&A in the background, and while we do that, I'd like to introduce Lisa Schwartz, who is the COO at ITSM Academy, and Lisa's here to share some information with us. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Karen. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I was so involved in what Pam was saying. I mean, really, wait till you see how much I tweeted, Pam. I'm not ready for my little bit. While we're gathering the questions, I just wanted to talk about our org change workshop, that we do have an organizational change management one-day workshop which explores the management of organizational change from a service management perspective. While it does not have the Adcar model in it, we might need to talk to you about that, Pam, because I really loved that. And the course does include our Game On, which is our interactive learning experience. And the nice part about this course, it's for on-site delivery, and it is 4 hours of lecture and conversation in the morning, and then 4 hours of true hands-on workshop in the afternoon. And we've split it so that it's kind of a plug and play. You can do either the 4 hours or the entire full 8 hours, which is something a little new to us, doing some of the courses more modularly. So that should, and if you're interested in learning more about the org change workshop, just email info@itsmacademy.com and we'll be happy to get you more information about it. And that should have been enough time to gather those questions. So I will let it go back to you, Karen. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know we've got about 8 minutes till noon, and I know some of you are going to be dropping off at noon. So just before you do, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. And for those of you that do need to drop off, we do want to wish you a very happy and safe holiday season. And I'd like to remind you, we do not have the webinar in December due to the holidays. So our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, January 16th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And our speaker will be Jane Grove, President of ITSM Academy. And Jane's presentation is titled, What is DevOps? And this webinar will introduce attendees to DevOps, the cultural and professional phenomenon that is rocking the IT world. And by encouraging better collaboration, communication, and integration between development and operational teams, DevOps is enabling organizations to build, deploy, and operate quality software faster. So please join us to learn more about the value of DevOps in January. And Pam, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. I have a question that came in by a tweet from Ian, and and he's asking, he's wondering, what is the purpose of a priority process, and whose goals would it serve? Okay,
I'm not really clear on what he's asking. Is there
And
any other information available?
Well, I can tell you this. Hi, it's Lisa. I think that Ian has dropped off of the webinar, but it was a follow-up to the question. We've had a whole conversation going on Twitter. And so it was a follow-up to, you know what, Karen, ask another question. Let me go find the question. Oh, here it is.
Okay.
Yeah, find another question. Let me go find that conversation on Twitter, and I'll circle back to you guys.
Okay,
great. Thanks,
just
Lisa.
let us know when you're ready. I've got a question for you from Ola, and the question is, who should draft an SLA, or who is more qualified to draft it? Is it the IT manager or the legal department?
So I would say in response to that, it probably depends a little bit on what your industry is. So if it's within an IT service provider, and your you're part of the business, right? And so your SLA is with the business itself. I would look to a service level manager, and certainly if you don't have one, I think an IT manager would certainly draft that. If your business relates to something like managed services where you're selling IT services or products to in the marketplace, you probably need to partner the IT manager with the legal department because your SLA is most likely going to be part of your contracts. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Pam. And if anybody has any additional questions as your question is being answered, just chat them right back in, and we'll just bring it back in to Pam again, just to let you know that.
And so, hi guys, I'm going to jump back in just to say the first tweet was, urgency for IT service delivery often overrides the need for detailed IT process. And then Ian's response to that was wondering what the purpose of priority process is and whose goal would it serve. So I guess there is a problem, the question tied to how do you determine what is urgency and prioritize what is urgent?
Okay, so usually impact and urgency equals priority, right, which is part of the ITIL materials. This is, actually determining impact and urgency is done based on the business. Some organizations do this. I've seen this done many different ways. I've seen this tied to business continuity plans. So, where the business is defining what applications they actually need and what the priority is of those applications around business continuity. So, I'm still a little confused on the question, but if the question relates to determining impact and urgency, I would say that you want to work with the business around defining what is impact and urgency. And when you combine impact and urgency together, that's what's equaling the priority of your incidents or your request.
I think that's where he was going with that. 140 characters, it does limit you a little bit.
It absolutely does.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Pam. Baber has a question, and it's, how do you avoid situations where changes are initiated due to misplaced blame? Is it possible to avoid this?
So changes are initiated due to misplaced blame. I think if you can start a conversation with whoever was involved in the situation, the initial situation, if you can start a conversation that is really based on, I want to make improvements. And instead of saying, gosh, this person's at fault or that team's at fault, just focus on how can I change the outcome, right? What can we do differently to get to a different result? If you can find that focus internally and evaluate things when they go wrong or when they certainly don't go as planned, using with that in mind, how can I change the outcome? What can we do differently, right? You should be able to get to more of the real root cause. So hopefully you can avoid situations where you're instituting change, but it's kind of misguided. There is a book that I would recommend to you called The QBQ, or The Question Behind the Question, and I can't recall who actually writes this book. But it focuses on how do I change from my own self, from the perspective of blaming others rather than focusing on changing an outcome. It's a really powerful book, The Question Behind the Question. And you can use that methodology that they describe in your own organization when you're doing root cause analysis and when you're kind of looking at situations and you're trying to change to more of a learning and improvement focus.
Pam, it's Lisa again. I just want to tell you that it's so funny to me you should mention that book because my whole team and I went through a leadership training program, and that was part of the program. And our internal monthly recognition program, we actually call it the QBQT. So every month we have a named QB Cutie who gets a gift, and it's based on that book. That's how powerful we thought it was. So once again, we're on the same page, and I'll stop talking now.
It is a really powerful book. It actually changed how I manage people. Probably 15 years ago, I read a first iteration, because there's multiple books out around the QBQ, but I read a first iteration, and I realized that I myself was way too focused on pointing a finger, and I had to change kind of how I managed things and how I managed myself when things went wrong. So really great book. I do recommend it.
Thank you, Pam. And speaking of books, Pam has chatted in and she said Pam has written a book, Idle and Organizational Change, and she's asking where we can purchase that book. And
sure.
I'm going to chat that in for everybody, because Pam's publisher has provided, if people are interested in this book, a discount code for a 40% discount off that book. So if you're interested, there's the information for that. So thank you, Pat, for asking that question. And Carmen is asking, how do you motivate the people to follow the process, and how to make them feel identified if they always say it's just more work for them?
So how do you motivate them to follow the process? If you think about it, and we actually look at the Adcar model, right? Let's start there. We want to first explain to them why it's important, right? And what is it we're really trying to achieve? So, why? Let's start with that awareness. We want to hopefully create that desire, that motivation around following a process. And sometimes, that is a performance objective. There are people who are motivated just because you put that performance objective down on paper for them. There are people who are motivated just because their manager comes and talks to them about it and talks about why it's important to the organization, right? But also I would say look at the metrics. Look at the existing metrics for that process performance, and look at how we're trying to change, and then monitor those metrics, but have conversations with them. The metrics don't look as they should. How do we make this better? What's going wrong? But if you think about following the process, I'll own the process if I'm involved in it. And I'm not talking about your formal ITIL process owner. I'm talking about me having a sense of ownership. If I'm involved in defining the process, I'm going to feel like I have a sense of ownership around it. So, engage people involved in the process in determining changes. If today you've already done an implementation and today it's just not going as you'd planned, pull the people in a room who, are involved in completing process steps and just talk about it. Write out potential options on a whiteboard. They will be much more engaged if they're involved in actually designing that process. Karen, did I answer both parts of that question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, you did.
Great.
And I have a lot of kudos here for you that are being chatted in, Pam. Thank you for a great session. Pam, you're awesome. Great presentation. So you're getting a lot of accolades as well being chatted in here.
That's great. I'm glad people found this really useful. I really hope it helps them as they're making changes in their organization. That's great to hear.
I have a big note to print out that Adcar change model myself.
You'll have to get back to me later. Yeah, you'll have to tell me when you use it.
I will. I will definitely do that. And I have one more question right now, so if anybody else has any more questions, this would be the time to chat them in if you could. And this question is from Jim, and Jim is asking, how well do customers understand the value of moving people along?
So how well do customers understand the values? I'm guessing Jim is probably in an organization where they're selling a product or a service of some sort. I would say your customers aren't thinking about that, right? Your customers are very focused on business objectives and achieving those objectives, right, and how they can do that efficiently and effectively. Now, I do believe that, and I've seen this, that your customers are, will get it. If you have a conversation with them where you talk to them about, we're planning for this change, and part of that is bringing people along and helping them adapt, because we're going to have a better result if we do that. They will understand that conversation, but initially it's not in the forefront of their mind. So I think it's a conversation we have to help bring them along.
Pam, Jim just chatted in and he said, I meant your customers. So I think what he's asking, how well do your customers understand the value of moving people along?
Okay.
He just said, ha.
I'm sorry, Karen?
He said, ha, I meant your customers. So thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
So again, I would go to this and say, my customers tend to look at this initially, and it's about how can I have my staff perform more efficiently and effectively, how can I cut or reduce costs, how do I optimize my investments? And again, people aren't at the forefront of their minds. But I look at every engagement that I do, and I think about the staff component and that change management component. And I build it into probably every conversation that I have with people, because it is such an important component. It is not at the forefront of my customers' minds, though. But they listen, right? They hear it. They understand. Now, sometimes certainly you have customers who say, well, we'll take care of that through organizational restructuring. And it's just a matter of walking them through why that is probably not going to resolve, their change adoption issues. So again, it's just a conversation. Some people really eventually embrace it. And there's always some people who will say, well, people should do things because I tell them to. Well, that's just not the way it works in the real world. And so at that point, it becomes more of a project risk.
Thank you, Pam. I have a question for you from Hope. And Hope is asking, how can an individual contributor help to motivate management to move forward?
Okay, so think about that. I'll go back to the Adcar model just because it's something we've talked about, and it's very simple. The management also has a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So if we have to address that with them. And I'm not sure what your initiative is, but if you want to motivate them to move forward, management, again, you need to tell them why it's important, what they could achieve from your initiative, what's the return on investment, right? Numbers tend to mean a lot to management. So if you could put the numbers together, that means a lot. And certainly if you can identify cost savings or cost optimization, that generally will instill a desire with managers. If you can talk about kind of the intangible relationship improvements, managers usually love to hear that because they don't have to listen to a lot of the finger pointing that sometimes goes on in an organization. And also better, teams working more collaboratively, teams working better, equates to more work being done. So, you're at desire there. If it's, as far as knowledge goes, I don't know what your initiative is, but, maybe giving them a short executive summary around the initiative that helps to bring them up to speed from a knowledge perspective, and ability and reinforcement, certainly could come later. But I think if you addressed the awareness, desire, and knowledge, you would certainly make some progress towards acceptance. There's a lot of things that come into play. There's budgets and things like that, but I think they would certainly stand up and listen, and they would certainly be supportive to look at it, with open eyes.
Thank you. And Hope chatted back in for you, too. She said to motivate to quit talking so much and for them to begin to make decisions to create movement. And she said, you're giving great answers.
Well, I'm glad that was helpful, Hope.
And Karen, I've got one more that came in through Twitter, which is, sounds like this person is a manager and is struggling with sitting with the team, everyone saying, yes, 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 sounds good, even though they believe they're doing this in a very open forum. I want ideas, I want suggestions, what's working, what's not working. And then everyone being on board in front of the manager and then leaving the room and, oh my God, do you believe we have to do this? I'm extrapolating from the 140 characters, but I believe that's what they're asking. Like, how do you get people that, because, like in the 5 dysfunctions of the team, people are so uncomfortable with conflict that they just want to, so.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And a lot of people will do that, right? They'll go to a meeting and they'll say, yes, this sounds great, because they don't want to deal with that conflict. And they'll agree to almost anything because they just don't want to deal with it. So a couple of suggestions there. You could take, I don't know how large your meetings are, but you could take 2 or 3 people, right, and do some pre-interviews with them one-on-one, because people don't tend to follow the crowd. They don't have a crowd to follow at that point, so they will be more open usually in a one-on-one situation. So have them identify it. Consider it anonymous feedback, so you don't bring up the person's name in the meeting, so they don't feel like they're in the middle of the conflict for providing you with maybe some feedback that's a little negative. So that will help, right? Also, when you're doing those interviews, don't stand back and just listen. Really just listen. No matter what they say, listen, which can be hard, right? Because our natural tendency, everyone, we want to justify what we're doing, right? But just hold that back as much as you can and just listen to them. And don't give in to justifying what you're doing. Just have that conversation and let them get it out. You could go into the meeting and actually start off with some of that feedback. Again, it should be anonymous, so you shouldn't tell them where you got it from. But rather than asking people to provide feedback, bring a ton of Post-it notes with you. Give people Post-it notes. And if you ask a question, have them write their answer on a Post-it note. That way, they're going to give you different answers because they're not just agreeing with what their neighbor said, right? They're going to feel like it's anonymous. So you will get a lot more feedback if you give them the opportunity to give it in some sort of anonymous way. So I hope that helps. Do you think I got to that, Lisa?
I do, and then I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that, because I think that Post-it note is interesting and really good advice. I've never thought of that. But for a team like ours that's virtual, that makes that challenging.
Right.
So any suggestions for, just kind of thinking out loud, but any suggestions for anonymous feedback when we're actually all virtual and can see each other? I'll think on that. If I come up with an answer, and I'm not even having a problem with it, but if I come up with an answer, I'll let you know.
Yeah, so I can tell you there's actually a website that will help with that, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'll have to search it on Yahoo. At least I can send it to you later, or we can tweet it out later, or put it in the, actually we'll put it in the Q&A.
Yeah, let's see that.
There's a website where you can go and you can actually, it will actually let you send anonymous feedback. So you could task people with, send me feedback if you're not comfortable with sending it to me directly. Here's a URL, you can use it, and it will actually mask who it's from.
Okay, good. Let's find that. Anonymousfeedback.org. Okay. I'm kidding.